One of our big goals is how do we motivate the private sector to invest more in smallholder finance? What we hear a lot of times from the financial institutions is just the sheer market size and the need to take market share is what drives them. And they just realize that huge chunks of their country they're not reaching and no one's reaching, and that there's an opportunity to do so.
This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. Because I'm something of a super geek, and what I like to think of as the new old guard, I had a TRS-80 in my house growing up. If you know what that means, give me a call. When I hear the term defragment, the first thing I think of is hard drives. Fortunately for everyone's sake listening to this, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Instead, on today's 153rd Terms of Reference podcast, I speak with Jason Wendle. He is the director of the Rural and Agricultural Finance Learning Lab, which focuses on identifying more and better financial solutions for smallholders. In our conversation, Jason and I discuss the continued fragmentation of the financial market seeking to serve smallhold farmers and how the lab and its many partners are working to connect the dots between the necessary trifecta of access to markets, access to knowledge, and access to finance. I'm sure you'll love this talk about the types of financial difficulties facing smallholder farmers, how fintech is starting to bridge the gap, but also how ultimately it will take a conscious evolution from traditional lenders to find true scale and sustainability. I spoke with Jason in Northern Virginia. But before we get started, here's a word from our sponsors.
The Terms of Reference podcast is sponsored by International Solutions Group, helping to improve the social impact of governments, UN agencies, NGOs, and companies for more than 10 years. Visit ISG online at www.theisg.com.
Hello, Jason. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Thank you, Stephen. It's good to be here.
I know that we're sitting in the same town right now. This is just serendipity for me. But tell everyone here, you're world travel. Actually, on your website, I saw that you were just in Dakar, actually, just a couple of weeks ago. So where are you sitting today?
So right now I'm in Northern Virginia, just outside of D.C., where our office is. And the Learning Lab has a base also in Nairobi, where I came from. I spent 6 years in Nairobi with Dahlberg before moving to D.C. last year to run the lab from here. But we have staff on the ground in Nairobi, and we cover sub-Saharan Africa pretty broadly. So Dakar is part of our West Africa outreach.
Nice. I love that, for all of those people who are, DC-ophiles, we're not actually in the same city. That's fantastic, because I'm actually in the Diamond. You're not. I love it, too, though. One of the great things about this sector, right, is that Nairobi was your home for the last 6 years or so, or, the previous 6 years. Like, as someone who's been overseas myself for going on 12 years now, too, it's really that's just an interesting conversation to have. It's like, where is home? Because Nairobi really felt like home, I'm sure, for quite a long time there. And now you've transplanted yourself here to Virginia, and voila, that's its own conversation in itself, right?
Yeah, and especially for my children. My 8-year-old was 1 when he moved to Nairobi, so for him, most of his life was Kenya. So last night, actually, at the elementary school, they did Heritage Night, and we ran a Kenya table to talk about our Kenyan heritage. So
that's fantastic. I love it. Jason, you are the director of the Rural and Agriculture Finance Learning Lab. It's a MasterCard Foundation initiative. I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation because we have a foundation initiative that has just a bunch of different partners, but a pretty focused goal. Why don't we start out as we usually do? Why don't you tell us about what the Learning Lab's all about and kind of what your goals are?
Sure. So the Learning Lab was started a few years ago at the same time as the MasterCard Foundation was really increasing its investment in smallholder finance, or what they call rural and agricultural finance. And the foundation was coming from a financial inclusion background and recognizing that smallholders are a key unreached customer group. But Dahlberg and GDI, which are two organizations that jointly proposed to the foundation to implement this Learning Lab, we were coming from a bit more of an ag development background, and so it was a good marriage, I would say. Dahlberg and GDI set together. Dahlberg is a strategy consultancy, and GDI is a nonprofit incubator. we said we can set up a lab and we'll bring in Dahlberg to do research, and GDI will provide the staff, and we'll help you gather the learnings from your new investments. And MasterCard liked that idea, brought us on, and we're a very close initiative of the foundation. So we're co-branded with MasterCard, and we work very closely with MasterCard's Rural and Ag Finance team. And this gives us the opportunity to access $175 million of programs. So MasterCard funds about $175 million of smallholder finance related programs in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's very concentrated if you think about one kind of intersectional sector of access to finance crossed with ag, and then one region. And so it's a MasterCard may be the single biggest investor in that particular intersection. So we get to access that full amount of programming in a sense as a petri dish. We learn from it. We help the foundation understand what its investments are doing, but we also share more broadly with the world what's happening in the smallholder finance space. And we're trying to really build a community. And last year, we issued a call to action alongside of our partner initiative called the Initiative for Smallholder Finance. We issued a kind of a call to action to the sector to double growth in order to have the need by 2025. So we have a role where we support the foundation, and then kind of a public facing role as well.
The first thing that springs to mind is, when I think of MasterCard, I'm an American by birth, but this is a finance company. This is a credit card company. What's their interest in smallholder finance? I know it's the foundation arm of MasterCard, but can you walk us through that? Like, why does this make sense?
Sure. So a few years ago, not really that long ago, about 10 years ago, MasterCard corporate IPO'd, and at that time they gave a certain percentage of their shares to a brand new foundation, the MasterCard Foundation, which is separated.
So that was intentional at the IPO stage.
Correct. Yeah, and it's very separate. So the foundation is based in Canada, for example, while the corporation is based in the U.S. And there's one board member that observes, but really there's no other coordination because they wanted to make sure that the charitable purposes was not ultimately for the benefit of MasterCard, the business. And it so happened that MasterCard stock grew rapidly. And so now the foundation has, I believe, $12 billion of assets, which makes it a very big player.
Just a small player. It's not a going concern, not a big deal.
Yeah. And when it was founded, it had a charitable purpose that was, fairly narrowly defined to youth learning and financial inclusion. So those were the two, topic areas they thought were important. And so historically, it's worked in areas of microfinance and things like that. But they started in both the youth side and the financial inclusion side. You can't work with poor people without getting to farmers pretty quickly, considering most of the world's poor are smallholder farmers. So pretty quickly they started to touch on these issues, and then they realized, microfinance has reached urban centers, but it really has yet to truly meet the needs of smallholder farmers and other rural dwellers. And so one of the big initiatives they did was this thing called the Fund for Rural Prosperity, which is a $50 million challenge fund that is basically trying to identify innovative approaches to funding smallholders in Africa and to fund the private sector to test out some of these innovative approaches, which is a new thing for the foundation, and it's a really interesting, probably anchor program within the rural and ag finance portfolio that we study.
Now you're this petri dish. You're set up for it. What have you learned so far? Now that you're there, like I guess I want to kind of jump right in. Like, what are your favorite kind of one or two successes of what you've learned, or the aha moments that you've already had where it's like, hey, this is where we need to focus, or this is where we need more attention, or hey, we discovered that we really don't have to pay attention to this anymore.
Sure. So one of the things that we've learned is that the sector, historically, people have been trying to get funds to smallholders for decades, but not very successfully. And part of the challenge is that the sector has been really fragmented. So you'll have agricultural development programs that will attempt to build value chains, but then they'll run into finance as a constraint, and they may not have a sophisticated view or ability to address the financial constraint. They maybe just take it as a given, and then it restricts the growth of what they can do. Or you might have like a financial inclusion, a microfinance or a financial inclusion program that's starting to realize that they need to reach smallholders, but they've never really understood agricultural development, and they don't know about crop cycles and production and things like that. And it's very different to give a typical group loan in a microfinance setting than it is to give a loan for agricultural productivity. And then a third area that's kind of been siloed or is the area of ICT for development. So you have people building mobile applications for farmers and things like that, but not always linking them to these other efforts that are going on in the space. And so one of the things that we've tried to do and observed is we observed this fragmentation, and we've tried to pull these players together. And what we really feel like in the last 5 or 10 years, you've started to see more discussion, in certain foundations and bilateral aid organizations. The access to finance team and the agricultural development teams may never speak to each other, but we're starting to see that change. And people are saying, hey, I need to talk to my finance colleagues, or I need to talk to my ag colleagues. And I guess alongside of that, we're starting to see partnerships on the ground, whether they are pre-competitive partnerships between a bunch of agribusinesses that know that they need to source from smallholders, or whether they could be partnerships between an agribusiness and a bank or a financial institution to reach smallholders. So the broad trend that we're excited about is defragmenting of the market and people coming together to try to come up with innovative solutions together.
Do you have like a really concrete example of maybe where either one of your partners or a new product line or new service line that really it's really cross-cutting across all three of those sectors?
There's certainly a few. So, for example, we're working right now with one of the Fund for Rural Prosperity's winners is Biopartner, which is a subsidiary of Barry Callebaut. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that, but the chocolate company. They've been working with farmers for years, but they've been providing loans to farmers. It turns out that actually agribusinesses provide a lot more finance than financial institutions presently. There's only so much they can do as a agribusiness to meet the financial needs of their farmers. So they reached out to a microfinance called Advance, and Advance was an urban microfinance, and they wanted to, and this is in Côte d'Ivoire, they wanted to get into the smallholder market, but they didn't know anything about ag. So they've started developing a savings product where farmers can save in an Advance account, and then for now, Biopartner will use that savings as kind of a collateral to make its input loans for fertilizer and other things that the farmers need. And then Biopartner has brought in a mobile app and a suite of extension services to help these farmers as well. So there's a technology component. And in the long-term goal is for the lending to actually move away from Biopartner to the microfinance or to the financial institution. It's a burden on the balance sheet of many agribusinesses. Even though they do most of the lending, a lot of them would prefer to give that to the financial institutions. So they're basically bringing an MFI into the market that otherwise had no idea where to start because they don't know these farmers. And Biopartner knows the farmers. It knows which ones can actually make productive use of a loan and things like that. And and then they have their IT developers that are working. I think the app is it's called like the mobile Cocoa app or something, which often provides ag information that farmers need.
I guess one of the things I'm really interested in, like you just mentioned, 4 or 5 different partners there. You've got a microfinance institution, or you've got a lending institution, you've got an ag business, you've got all the smallholder farmers. I was researching before we started the show. You have lab learning partners, and you've got Mercy Corps, you've got 1 Acre Fund, you've got Agri, you've got AgDevco. Is it your job to manage this alphabet soup? Is that what your day-to-day is spent doing, trying to bring these partners together and make sense of it all? Because I'm just trying to think of myself, if I'm a smallholder farmer in sub-Saharan Africa, and I see these brands all coming at me, or maybe the smallholder farmer will never see it. Maybe they just see the product that comes to them. I could see where there'd just be a ton of confusion there. How do you make sure that confusion doesn't happen? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, so typically the farmer will see a product that might look different than any of those brands. So for example, Mercy Corps, their role is to help provide technical support to create new partnerships. So Mercy Corps themselves has maybe 20 to 25 what we've called sub-partners. Like in their case, for example, they're working with Safaricom, which is Kenya's largest mobile network operator, and they're developing a new dairy product. And so the farmer will just see Safaricom's dairy product. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, Mercy Corps and a bunch of tech firms, they work with people like Arifu and others, and Safaricom and others will have been developing, and designing some of these solutions. As far as the lab's role, we try to coordinate the learning between these different organizations because a lot of them are asking similar questions. And so we map what we call their learning questions. And if two organizations are asking similar questions, we try to help them learn from each other where possible. And sometimes we build on what one organization's doing with our own research to kind of advance the knowledge frontier. But it is challenging. A lot of our time does get spent just trying to figure out what's happening all at once because there's so much, there's 10 partnerships, like I said, $175 million of programs, 22 different countries. So we maintain close connections. We sort of have a client relationship management with each of these partners. And then we conduct some of our own research. But some of these partners have a bigger research budget than the lab itself. So we'll be most effective if we can really make sure that there's synergies between these different partners and what they're trying to learn. So, for example, right now, AGRA, it has a program called the Financial Inclusion for Smallholder Farmers in Africa. That's one of our partners. They're studying how alternative data, which is, you could think of that as non-financial transaction data about farmers, can enable people to make loans to them who otherwise couldn't. And so they're looking at farm management information system data. So from different software where someone is buying regularly from a farmer, if they start collecting data on that farmer's production, can this agriculture company that has this farm MIS system data, can they go to a financial institution and say, here's all this data on these farmers. Do you want to lend on this? This is a whole alternative data world. AGRA is doing a study in that. But meanwhile, Mercy Corps is working with a few partners in Kenya to come up with an experimental model of a data set that could be used for lending. They're looking at a few other different sources of data. A lot of these other partners, BioPartner, who I talked about, they're trying to collect data on the farmers with their app and use that for lending. So we see within the portfolio a lot of activity in alternative data. What the Learning Lab wants to do with that is, firstly, make sure that the different players who are doing this are aware of what each other are doing. And then secondly, see, are there unanswered questions that we can help everybody learn all at once? Do we want to come alongside one of these studies or experiments, or do we want to do some higher level research on the market to find out where all of this fits together? So we try to make sense of what's happening and try to speed up communication between these different organizations because people aren't always aware of what's happening in other programs. And
sometimes it's impossible, right? Because you're drinking from a fire hose. Just being able to step back and take that 20% of your time to learn about what other people are doing is sometimes a massive luxury. Just a sort of a granular question, real quick: is the alternative data that you're talking about that they're looking at through the apps and stuff, is that to determine creditworthiness, to determine business practices, or
Sure. So
is that the kind of stuff that they're looking at?
Yeah. So, the first way people think about it is about credit underwriting. So people have used mobile phone top-up transaction data. They'll use farmer data on farmer training.
Sure. Someone consistently tops up their mobile phone. They're getting paid. That they're consistent.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You can start. It's using, it's big data and big data analytics. And you can start now. That's one big change in the last 5 years. Is just so much more data is potentially at our fingertips. Now there's a lot of potential, and we haven't yet seen the full working out of it yet because financial institutions are notoriously slow and conservative. But there's so much data on farmers that could be used. And some other people are talking about satellite data and overlaying geography and weather data. And you can combine a lot of this procurement data. So if you sell seeds to a farmer, so the record of those sales is a measure of their productive capability, of certainly the people who buy from farmers. So the challenge is to get all this data and then to get it and then to convince people to share it, which is hard because there's not a clear value on the data yet. But all of that can come together initially to make credit decisions. But a lot of people suggest, especially my colleagues at the Grameen Foundation, what they'll say is actually the real power of alternative data or big data in this space is not just for making credit decisions, but it's also for predicting customer behavior in other ways, and for optimizing business processes, and for segmenting customers. And they realized that their loan officers didn't have to spend so much time. They were working with a company called Musoni, which is a niche lender in Kenya. They realized, by looking at the data, that their loan officers could have a much higher ratio of clients to loan officer if they were focused on just the ones that really needed their support, and they didn't spend so much time with every single group. Certain groups needed more and less, and they were able to get that from the data. So there's a lot of potential that's still untapped.
We've had quite a few guests on this show that talk about big data potential. There's a lot of great examples out there, and I personally just attended something that was sponsored by USAID in Bangkok on new financial initiatives like this, and it's like a brave new world. It really is that if we feel like, hey, it's already 2017, there's already so much that we do know and so much that we can know, but when you start to scratch the surface, it seems like almost that there's still more questions than answers, right? I mean, and that's part of the fun discovery process.
Yeah, and especially when the owner of the data is not the user. Well, the owner of data, then there's the holder of the data, and then there's the organization would use it, and often it's not the same organizations. And overcoming some of those initial hurdles, some skepticism about the quality. So, for example, financial institutions, they're skeptical about the quality of the data that agribusinesses are providing. And then agribusinesses, they may be reluctant to share it because they're thinking, once I give you the data, you have it, and now I can't.
No more middleman. Yeah, no.
Exactly. So those types of which is often the case. The technological innovation is usually the easy part. It's the business models and the partnership negotiations and that kind of stuff, some of the softer things that often are the real challenge in these markets, and I think broadly in development.
Hey guys, you're about 25 minutes into this episode, and if you're finding value in this conversation with Jason about how we're defragmenting these financial markets in Africa, can you take a moment right now, just open up iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, whatever it is you're listening to, and give us a rating? 1 star is great if you don't like what you're doing, but 5-star would be even better, right? And even, click on subscribe so you never miss an episode. And also, if you're really enjoying this and want to share it with others, click on Facebook, click on Twitter, share the episode, share the podcast, and help others to get in on the game of making aid and development better. Now, back to the show.
So, you've been the Director's Lab for a while. Is there a surprising finding that you could put on the table? Like one of those ahas where you're like, well, we did not expect that at all.
I would say a couple things. One thing is the market is harder to reach profitably than I probably thought going into it. Usually you think, well, once they get over the initial hurdles, you can do this. But smallholders are still very hard to reach in a profitable way, not necessarily because of the risk, although certainly there are big, catastrophic weather risks and things like that. But it's not necessarily that farmers are more likely to default on loans that are provided, I should say, with the exception of government state loans. But it's the transaction cost of reaching them, and then the fact that typically for a loan product or many financial products to be successful, you need training, you need access to markets. You have to have all three in place: access to markets, access to knowledge, and access to finance. If you don't have all three of those things, the model breaks down. So it's just very, very hard to pull all this together. And it's not like banks don't normally want to be experts in ag or whatever sector they lend to. They just want to look at your cash flows and look at your collateral and then give you the money and let you figure it out. But if you really, as a financial institution, want to get involved in smallholder finance, you have to partner with somebody who's addressing the agronomic needs and the agronomic training needs and the access to knowledge needs. And so we haven't seen, there's not yet there's no clear, this is exactly how to do it. There's no winner yet who everybody can point to and say, they figured it out. Now, that wasn't entirely shocking, but I guess I would say a little more surprising than I thought. But what makes it, particularly surprising is juxtaposing that with the interest. There continues to be such a strong, especially in Africa, there is still a pretty strong movement and interest among the private sector to get into smallholder finance. So even as
it's they can smell it's there. It's just who's gonna be the one who shows up with the skeleton key, right?
Right, that's right. And I think it's the market. So when we talk to people, because one of our big goals is how do we motivate the private sector to invest more in smallholder finance? And based on that goal, the question is what type of research and evidence do we need to compile? And we are doing studies, although it's still early days, on really trying to understand the ROI of getting into the space. But what we hear a lot of times from the financial institutions is just the sheer market size and the chance to, and the need to take market share is what drives them. And they just realize that huge chunks of their country they're not reaching and no one's reaching, and that there's an opportunity to do so. And especially in places that are competitive like Kenya, where there's a kind of an arms race to reach smallholders. You have Kenya Commercial Bank, which is one of MasterCard's and our partners. It's the largest, I think it's the largest commercial bank in East Africa, and they're putting a ton of resources to reach smallholder farmers, which is kind of unheard of in the commercial banking world in Africa typically.
I want to step back for a second. We're talking a ton about technology and its role in this whole process. At the smallholder farmer level, at the farmer level, the person who's in the field or running the farm, is tech just is that just a given now? I mean, is it still your low tech phone, or is it smartphones? And the only reason I ask is because I've been lucky enough to be on some projects where I'm like in super rural Uganda, and this is a place that they have electricity intermittently, but people will throw open their smartphone and they want to check their Facebook when they've got a signal. Is that what you're finding as well? Like it's just a given now, or is it still kind of we're not sure about this?
In most of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa that we're working in, you'll have like more SIM cards than adults. So that's I guess technically 100% penetration, although a lot of times people have a SIM card and not a phone, or they have multiple SIM cards. But you do have a high rate of mobile phone penetration. They're typically not smartphones though. So most of the mobile apps for farmers use a USSD, some kind of a USSD interface or text messaging at this stage. But there's been rapid work to reduce the cost of a smartphone. I heard someone from Opportunity International, one of our partners, told us that they're going to come out very shortly with like a $40 Android phone. So that starts to really make it more affordable. But in all of this, there's a big variation. So, every time you talk about these great opportunities, you always hear, often you'll get somebody who's from someplace. Actually, there was a guy from rural northern Uganda who said, only 8% or something like that, 15%. So it was like 8 or 18, I forget. Less than 20% of his farmers even have phones. And I was shocked because everywhere I go in Kenya, and the data suggests that everybody has phones.
I was just going to say that surprises me a lot.
Yeah. So, but he's working with these guys who grew up in refugee camps in northern Uganda who were, I guess, fleeing from the Lord's Resistance Army. And so it may be a particular group, but it's important to remember that not all the farmers that we're talking about have these devices. But by and large, people do have access to them. A lot of people hope that, the use of technology will bring more youth into farming, which is a perennial challenge. But smartphone technology typically right now is being used by agents, loan officers, and kind of the people that are doing the work. Not very rarely would someone develop a smartphone app for a farmer. I think we're still a few years from that, because even Kenya, which is in many ways the leading economy in the realm of mobile money and digital advances, you still don't see a huge penetration of smartphones.
Mm-hmm. I want to take us forward 3, 4, 5 years in the future. You talked about how the defragmentation of the three sectors, right? Farmers, the money, and ICT4D, the tech. Is that your focus for the next 5 years? Are there other things on the horizon that you think are important that you'll be looking at, or important changes that you expect to be facilitating or producing knowledge about?
So we partner with a sister program called the Initiative for Smallholder Finance. Not to confuse things further, but they're another program that...
of course you do.
They're another GDI program. We jointly published a study called Inflection Point back in 2016, and they're focused more on facilitating transactions, while we focus a little bit more on the research. But we have a call to action that centers around three things. One is customer centricity at the demand level, so just an increased designing of products with the needs of farmers in mind. It's surprising how often you would think that naturally people who want to develop a product would really do a lot of deep market research and really understand the customer's needs. But a lot of times products are designed in a boardroom in Nairobi and then shipped out to some rural place in Kenya, and they don't reflect the real needs of farmers. People in the capital cities in Africa typically have forgotten a little bit about what it's like to live up country.
And then the people in the boardroom say, "Hey, how come they don't ever use this thing? It's perfect for them."
So we're seeing a switch. There's a use. We advocate, and we're seeing a lot of people use human-centered design approaches, and just broader recognition that you can't take a standard financial product and just call it agricultural. You have to think about seasonality of lending and flexible repayments and things like that. So customer centricity is the first kind of part of our call to action. The second is progressive partnerships, which gets into what I was talking about across these silos, along the value chain, and between financial institutions and what we call value chain players or agribusinesses. More, partnership that basically shares the cost of doing this type of work and shares the risk. Because if it's all on one player in the value chain, it won't work. So that's the second. And then the third, we called it smart subsidy, which is noting that at the level of capital providers, it's still hard for many financial institutions to get enough capital or to get the right price, to get the capital that matches their needs when it comes to providing financial services. And we don't work as much at that level as the Initiative for Smallholder Finance does, but it's an important part of the picture, which is there are organizations like Root Capital that lend to farmer cooperatives, and they do it pretty successfully, but they have to lend in hard currency, dollars or euros, because currency exchange rate fluctuates too much, which in the end is hard for the cooperative. The cooperatives would like to borrow in local currency, but it's just the interest rate that Root Capital would have to charge. It would just be prohibitive. So ISF and others are talking about whether there should be a donor-funded currency exchange risk-sharing fund. But it's important to note, we start with the mindset that we think this whole thing can be generally private sector driven or a market led intervention, but agriculture is, especially agricultural finance, is subsidized around the world. Even in the United States, insurance premiums, crop insurance premiums are subsidized. You have loans that are underwritten by guarantees. So the idea that you could do smallholder finance with zero subsidy at all doesn't necessarily make sense relative to what we see even in the most advanced markets.
Not to challenge you on that, but I feel in the United States, okay, great, we've got the Farm Bill every year. That comes from a cultural underpinning that farming is important, right?
Yeah.
Whereas it seems like in some of these other markets, it's not that obviously farming is important, but there's not like this, hey, farming, manifest destiny, own your own land, that kind of thing. It's more like this is a massive market and we need to figure out how to tap it. Would you agree with that?
I would say I'm not suggesting that the type of subsidies we see in Europe and the U.S. are all well designed and all economically justified. Certainly, there's some real
there's fat
political motivations, but no agricultural sector has reached the state of kind of the massive production that we do without a huge lift from the government. So even if you look at the land grant institutions in the U.S., these are all these colleges and universities. You can think of Michigan State or Penn State, where I went to undergrad.
Colorado State University, yeah.
That's
where I went. Sorry.
So we're both from land grant universities in undergrad, and those were started in many ways to advance agriculture and to provide training and knowledge to farmers that they couldn't have afforded to pay somebody to do that research, to provide that knowledge. So extension is one key area, I would say, where you've seen some subsidy that's helped transition these sectors. And then insurance is the other area, because especially with climate change, even increasing the catastrophic risk, when you have correlated risk to a country's food supply, it can be hard for a private insurance provider to deal with that level of risk. So taking that now back to kind of these places in, where we work in sub-Saharan Africa, you've seen a lot of bad subsidy. So a lot of subsidy has been wasted, and it's maybe been used for patronage. If you're a member of the tribe of the current ruling party or the president or whatever, your area gets more, subsidized inputs or things like that. But the fact that there has been wasted subsidy doesn't mean that no subsidy is needed. And effective extension is a really critical one, because it's hard for a financial institution or an off-taker to bear the cost of the training for farmers. And I think insurance, until people, there have been in Ethiopia right now, Kifia is a partner of ours. They're a winner of the Fund for Rural Prosperity. They've developed this satellite-based insurance product that has It's like apparently like 100 times more precise than the previous product in the region. So it works in like a 1 by 1 kilometer area. And then they use digital platforms to distribute it. So apparently it reduces the cost of distributing insurance by 60%. But the government of Ethiopia is still underwriting a huge chunk of the premiums, because in many cases, fundamentally, it is just really a big lift it's at the stage of development of these economies and the level of risks that they have. It's hard for the private sector to fully bear that.
Mm. You talked about these call to actions that you've done. Have any of those over the lifetime of the Learning Lab, have any of those become a standard practice, something that we've gone out, we've learned this, the knowledge is sound and everybody agrees on it, and now that's just sort of become the standard for either a lender or maybe across the sector?
The Learning Lab it feels pretty new. We're only, we're about 2 years old.
That's pretty new.
But it feels newer than that, because a lot of the early days was, trying to figure out where do things stand in the sector. And then all these partners that you see, a lot of them all just came in the last year. We started out with only 4 partners. So the additions, we've done a lot of like onboarding of all these partners. So I would say it's early days. I would say, and I'm not going to credit the lab for this, but a lot of people have been trumpeting customer centricity for a while. And we've started to see, when we hold annual convenings, our annual gatherings where we do some kind of like a learning workshop, and usually there's a customer centricity element or focus, and we're seeing private sector players coming to the table, really excited to learn about it and really realizing that, they need to increase their ability to listen to their customers, to do human-centered design, or to do customer satisfaction measurement, which is something we've really tried to champion, and other client, what we call client voice, or really kind of elevating the voice of the farmer. There has, I feel like, been some progress on that front, and in the mentalities of the new businesses the new ideas that are popping up, and the existing financial institutions that are moving into the space. It is starting to be kind of generally accepted that you have to really try to be customer centric in your design.
Nice. There's 2 questions that I like to ask everyone in this series that we're talking about here. And one is, how do you stay on top of the universe of what's relevant not only to the Learning Lab, but just to your career and to being a development or humanitarian aid professional in general, someone in the social sector? Are there particular podcasts or blogs or magazines that you read that you think you'd like to recommend to others?
Well, we do read Stanford Social Innovation Review. That has some pretty interesting, from the point of view of like, we do a lot of like learning or impact measurement work. We found that to be pretty useful. We work with Impact Alpha and Next Billion in terms of trying to get the word out. In our space, it's kind of this narrow, like I said, it's this intersectional space between finance and ag development, and it hasn't historically had too much of a distinct community. So what we learn in terms of our space, a lot of it is by getting people together in a room, which is really old school and expensive. But until you have a chance to talk face to face with people, sometimes you don't fully understand what they're trying to do, or people, we're trying to build trust in the industry. We feel like, Elon Musk, he gave away a lot of his patents because he realized that, the electric car industry, Tesla would be better off if the industry itself was growing at a faster rate. And we kind of think there's something similar is needed in smallholder finance, where we need as much transparency as possible. It's because no one yet exactly knows how to make it work. And so we need everybody to be sharing what they're doing. But the only way to build that trust sometimes is bringing a lot of people together to meet each other so they can face the person they're working with. But we find once you build that, then you can sometimes transition to more like where we're building a communications platform that's kind of like Slack, but for multi-organizational collaboration. And there's the conference circuit, of course. A lot of conferences. A lot of times, the best value of those is the meetings you have on the side. But it is a good way to quickly kind of get up to speed on what's happening. Well, we think there's a gap, at least in the because we have this narrow focus, and we're trying to help fill that. So we have a communications person that helps us get out there on Twitter and or get our website out there and things like that. And we do a bunch of webinars.
I love it. Yeah, you're a content creator. You're creating new knowledge, which is always a very exciting place to be. Last question I have for you is there an innovation or a new technology or a new process or something that's coming down the pipe that, doesn't have to be agriculture related or anything like that, it's designed to help people in need that you think deserves a shout out here, or you'd love to just give a highlight to?
Well, yeah, I'm pretty excited about. Now, of course, a lot of people have already talked about these guys, but Mkopa is a solar. They do solar home systems in Kenya and now Tanzania, and they finance them using. Basically, they provide the system, and then the farmers or the clients pay off the solar home system over time through installments using mobile money. And then because of their technology, they can actually shut off the solar home system if the customer stops making the payment. More people know about that particular innovation, but it's really what it is. I mean, what's amazing about it is it just provides, it takes care of the whole challenge of collateral and collections, and that really, people don't have collateral. And so that's why you don't see very much lending. What I want to give a shout out to is that they've realized that they're not just in the business of solar home systems, but actually they're in the business of asset finance, and that they can refinance the solar home system asset to make agricultural loans. So they're in a project within the Fund for Rural Prosperity that we're going to be hopefully doing an impact evaluation of. They're basically, once the farmers paid off the solar home system, which takes about a year, they can actually refinance it to get a loan for agricultural purposes. The solar home system continues to be the asset that's collateralized, and they can still shut off someone's power if they stop paying. So having that recourse from remote, they do it remotely from Nairobi or whatever. Having that recourse now enables farmers who previously didn't have an asset they could borrow against to have something that's really easy to borrow against. And I feel like this could open up a whole new way of lending. And asset finance has been a real gap in the area of agriculture. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen there. Mkopa already has hundreds of thousands of customers that already have the solar home. They can already build on top of that with loans for farmers.
I love that example. Thanks so much for sharing. Jason, this has been a very interesting and fantastic conversation. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Well, thank you. It's been great to be here and great to speak with you.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from 8preneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.